Hi, I'm Paul Plant. I'm from Public Health England. I'm here with a colleague, Rachel Flowers. Public Health England is a new agency set up by the Department of Health as part of the reforms of both the NHS and the public health system. We are charged with providing health protection services, which we do in local communities. We help with trying to focus health services on the right things in population health terms, but really importantly, we have a third domain, which is to help ensure the population of England and all the population of England enjoys good health. And the way in which we do that, which is why we're so fantastic to get the invite today, is to enable particularly local government translate and relate to policymakers' evidence and experience from around the world into local action. So we won't put that into practice ourselves, but we're a translation organisation. So, is it just... Okay, thank you. So hopefully in about 13 minutes, I'm really clear why we need to work with you, and I'm sure Rachel and I would welcome lots of conversations with you outside the meeting and engagement. We're 6 months old, so I won't go into a lot of what we're doing at the moment, but I'll do three things. I'll try and outline a number of threads of what's happening in health to locate what we'll need to do together. And I'll have some references to England and London, where I have more experience. Hopefully I won't need to convince you, but I will touch on we already know enough to get going. We don't have to be passive. There is some transformational change happening in England, where public health is going home to local government after having a period of being in the NHS, which is, for a public health specialist, slightly odd to have found myself so long arguing from the outside into people who have real determinants. And when I spoke to Joseph, I'll look at some of the implications for infrastructure in particular and multi-levels of governance. Okay. How does this not work? I'll do it. So, Public Health England, early in its coming into existence, colleagues co-wrote with people around the industrial world a look at what the current patterns of global health burden are. Okay, so this slide gives you disability adjusted life years, and what does it tell you? Things I hope you already know, but just re-influence it. The big killers and the big aspects which will create disability amongst our population, the key drivers to it have got nothing to do with health services. The report also showed that despite massive investment in the NHS, England was still making very little progress in improving the health. Against trend, there were improvements in morbidity and mortality and physical diseases, virtually no progress in mental health. And despite that investment, deep, sustained inequalities in outcomes at every single stage of life. And Sir John mentioned, that was one of the key failings of this system. So what does that tell us? I think I'll skip it. Trends in those factors which are influencing on health are mostly going in the wrong direction, which is worrying. In some of our communities, we started to get worried that children of this generation would die earlier than their parents because of those trends. So just bear that in mind as we go through this agenda setting rather than giving you lots of answers. So Michael Marmot's team fantastically said, that's all very well, but what we know, what are the causes of those causes are deep-rooted social economic conditions in which people live. And if there's one graph you only ever need to read from report is, by the age of 3 to 4, in this country, inequalities in health have already been put in place. Just think about it. Public sector responses to that can ameliorate and for individuals help, but collectively for those most disadvantaged families do not transform. So we come back to that as a transformational element we need to get to. We know, to pick up another theme of what does the health data tell us, that as we go forward, the burden on our health services is rising inexorably because the number of long-term conditions, their prevalence, an ageing population, new technologies, and greater expectation is placing unsustainable demands on health services. There's another thing which I haven't got time to go into about the discourse changing, but we'll perhaps pick that up. Okay, so what does this tell us? That this agenda is not about health services. The policy response in this country and when we read it across the world is about trying to get slightly more efficiencies out of a system which fundamentally can't address these issues. We go to interminable debates about mostly hospital services, where they should be, how they should be, and to be honest with a public health person, fantastic. They are important. They're really important for individuals, but they tend not to be terribly important for the agenda I'm talking about. Where does it take us, and what do we know from the evidence? And pick up some various themes which have come up already, is a public sector response is unaffordable and inappropriate. We know enough to know that people's health is co-produced with them, not by somebody else which is medicalised for them. We know individuals and communities have fantastic assets, which mostly we ignore, and what we'll have to build on going forward. We know that the change in behaviours are not necessarily conscious, but we seem to be trying to make people conscious of their behaviours. But actually it's the fact that the healthy choices for lots of people about walking and food and all sorts of things are the most expensive for them and the most difficult, which has all sorts of implications about how we design our urban realm and how we move forward. And so when you telescope this into the future agenda of cities, we're on a completely different space, intellectually, cross-disciplinary, what we're trying to do together, who's talking to whom, who's got a leadership role, than we would have been if we were in that sort of, it's about the NHS. A few years ago, I was policy lead in the Department of Health, trying to get cross-government sign-up to, if we're really going to develop in our urban realms, the ability of a community to develop in a way in which it helps its own health, what would good look like? What are the outcomes you're looking for? What are the key dimensions before we got into delivery? It was fantastically difficult. We used different language, we wanted to add to it, it got very complicated, different government ministers, don't quote me, would find it difficult to sign up to. So it's a general sense of, I know as a public health specialist, and I'm sure Rachel can share as well, is we would know one when we saw one. And so would the people in it. And if you ask them, they'll tell you what one is. So we seem to have a policy bit over here which didn't match people's lived experiences, and therefore we couldn't work through how we could help people's lived experiences to be health improving. And so I hope, I don't need to go through that in any detail, but one really important bit, I'll just draw out one or two things, is the research evidence in health shows that people's control over their own circumstances is itself a determinant of their health. Whether it's in their work, whether it's in their community, wherever it is, the very fact of involvement and control is a determinant. It's not something external, it's not something that happens to you, there's an internal agency in there. So it's not just about any employment, it's about some sorts of employment, so that's one thing. We have to, if we are really going to improve health in cities, enable communities to enable themselves to develop human, social, cultural capital. And I think there's an interesting debate as to whose role is that. And in the English context, it's fantastic that public health goes back to local government because it has a fundamental leadership role and actually closeness and political legitimacy to work with those communities. It is not the NHS doing it from an outside coming in. It's not national government putting it down. It is going to enable that sort of work to do. So why we talk to you, Rachel and I, is we will put leaders in those spaces, but they'll need the tools, the evidence, the understanding to be able to provide that leadership role. So just sort of veering off slightly to sort of keep on to what I was asked about. So what does this mean for infrastructure projects? So the assertion one is health outcomes and health objectives need to be measured and part of the assessment process. Experience two is a lot of them have detrimental impacts on some communities' health, but with good planning and other things put around them, you can ameliorate those impacts. Three, you have to involve people in design, because people's lived experiences are different from if you're sitting in Whitehall, if you're sitting in a different sort of space. And then finally, there are assessment methodologies which have been developed but need developing further, which are helpful. So that's the practical bit. We'll go into this, just be given the sort of a 3-minute warning, is you'll know better than I. This is phenomenally challenging, but it's not a recipe for not doing it. So if you go back to the original one, we failed. If we failed, we have to think differently, and we also have to act differently. So this is a sort of, let's look at this together, because there's all sorts of complexities about the evidence, the interdependencies, the complex interactions, the who benefits, who doesn't benefit. There's trade-offs with the social goals. So finally, what does that mean? Governance matters because those impacts matter and they're differentially distributed. But doing it in the fact that people's lived experience is very local and some of these infrastructure projects are at different levels entails a multi-level level of governance which is complex. And I'll assert is that there's a delicate ecology of that which may not be structural. It may not be structural. So we get sort of worried about who does what and etc. But it simply may be an understanding of the collective outcomes we need to achieve and then aligning around some very simple outcomes to get the debate going and to drive that change and enable it to happen. So I have no panacea of how you might do that. I only know that it works through talking, it only works through interdisciplinary collaboration, and it only works if you listen to whoever else is in the room and whoever else has a different view. I think I've just run out of time, so thank you.